It all started like a few months ago. I live in a pretty big house. I live on the third floor, and my bedroom has long windows with curtains next to my closet. On the other side of the window, you can see a little yard. This yard has some stairs that go up to the ceiling. The stairs can be partially seen on the left side through the window. Someday, I was already preparing to sleep because I suffer from insomnia and I take time to fall asleep when a black cat started to do some noises in the yard. That wasn't strange for me because there's always a cat or two in the yard, so I decided to go and see the cat through the window. There it was calm, but it was seeing something in the stairs. Because I can't see all the stairs, I didn't manage to see what it was, so I assumed it was another cat. Suddenly, the black cat started to get closer to the stairs when it just got all bristly and jumped, making me get surprised. But I didn't care. When I looked again to the stairs, I just saw a woman's hair and hand crawling to the other side. It gave me goosebumps, so I rapidly closed the curtains and got in bed. I can't forget that. It was so scary. Last year, I moved into an old farmhouse that my husband has spent over 20 years of his life at. It was built in the 1760s, and there's been an ongoing joke with the family that the house has seen a lot and has a lot of travellers. We live in an area close to an old fort in New Hampshire, and my husband and I both grew up hearing stories about the French and Indian War. My husband also grew up being told that multiple people died in the house. I was finally able to verify this with a newspaper article, but never previously actually experienced anything here. I had visited the house multiple times before moving in, and nothing ever really struck me until I visited in October 3 years ago. As soon as we got close to the property, I became terrified. It was just pure fear. I thought maybe it was my depression or anxiety, and nothing made it give me a second thought. I moved in and occasionally felt like someone was watching me, but I figured, hey, it's an old house. But the weird part is, during the months of September to January, I'm full of fear and terror. At first, I suspected a case of seasonal depression or something, but the amount of fear I felt was almost agoraphobic, which is highly unusual for me. There's a field across the street from our house, and I'm unsure of the history, but it seems most of the fear is centered around this field and a particular tree that's located in it. Last September, my husband was also out shoveling and felt like something was watching him, and quickly realized a black figure was watching him from the tree line. He said he felt a deep sense of fear and then it randomly just disappeared. The newspaper article I found did state a man fell to his death in October of 1893, but I feel like it's something so much darker. I live in an old farmhouse that was built in the 1760s. My husband has grown up in this house for the past 20 plus years and rarely experienced anything other than the occasional old house creaking, etc. He had a few unexplained experiences in the barn before it was torn down, sounds of people talking, what sounded like hay being thrown, etc. But that was really it. Things have been slowly progressing since I moved in last year, starting with my husband seeing a black figure watching him from the tree line. We at first attributed it to sleep deprivation or shadowing because it was last winter, in the middle of the night during a snowstorm. However, we have seriously been decluttering decades of things. The apartment we live in is where his grandparents lived before they died, and no one ever got around to decluttering anything, and things are getting weird. Here are just a few things we've experienced. I'm not flat out saying it's paranormal, as we are both parents to a newborn. You know how sleep deprivation can be, mixed with some unrelated stressful things going on in our lives. As I was cooking a snack in the middle of the night, I caught a glimpse in the corner of my eye of a woman in a long flannel nightgown. 5-second flash and gone. Heard disembodied what I could call chatter while using the bathroom in the middle of the night. Very muffled sounds like laughing and just general conversation. We found out this was a tavern. Things are being knocked over in a closet where we found a hidden, either warning oven. It's in the middle of 2 fireplaces, all food storage. This same closet mysteriously opens in the middle of the night. We haven't caught it, but noticed it's open when we get up. Sounds of banging. At first, I truly thought it was maybe old pipes and old house equals weird noises. But my husband said 3 years ago, all the piping was redone, and he's never heard these noises. Major issues with our internet router. The internet company has come in 3 times and can't explain why the signal keeps dropping randomly. Replaced the router, still happening. This doesn't even cover the weirdness outside. There was a confirmed death, via a newspaper article, in the barn in the 1800s via a fall at night. Where the old barn was is downright creepy. It sounds like things walking through the leaves. We live in an area that was very active during the French and Indian War as well. And there's just this weird, I don't even know what to say, surrounding the property. I will update if more things happen. My husband said this is the most activity he's ever witnessed in the 20 plus years he's lived there. I recently unlocked this memory after hearing a similar story, so I'll share it with you in case someone else also has a similar memory or experience. It was summertime around the late 2000s. I was having a sleepover with my cousin in the basement of my grandparents' house. Things were difficult with her part of the family, so we tended to have a lot of sleepovers around this time. The layout of the basement was set up as follows. A pull-out sofa was on the furthest wall. This is where her and I slept. I was on the left side of the pull-out, and there was a side table with a lamp that we kept on throughout the night so it wasn't pitch black as we slept. In front of us, there was a wall that had the TV, and behind the wall was the laundry room, which had an open doorway to it, causing the light to leak out into the main room of the basement. I woke up in the night sometime. A loud clanging noise had woken me up. It sounded like someone hitting a thick metal pipe with a crowbar. It was coming from the laundry room. I was confused, but stayed in bed. I looked at the lights coming from the laundry room. There was a large silhouette in the light that kept growing like it was getting closer, all while the clanging noise was getting louder. By now, I checked if my cousin was awake. She wasn't. I thought it was strange since the noise was so loud. I decided not to wake her. When I looked back at the laundry room, there it was. Exiting the laundry room ever so slowly, it was the typical depiction of the Grim Reaper. Hidden in a cloak, carrying a scythe in its skeletal hand. The sound it was accompanied with was coming from a chain and ball that was around its ankle. I wasn't scared at this point. I didn't feel like it was threatening to me. But of course, as a child, seeing something like that would terrify anyone. My fear only increased when the following happened. It turned and looked at me. The endless depth of the hood just stared at me. I quickly hid under the covers, my back facing my cousin. I could still feel that it was there, looking at me. After I don't know how long, the clanging continued, getting quieter as it got further away from me. I assumed it had gone upstairs and then just left. I couldn't go back to sleep after that. I remember grabbing my DS from the side table with the lamp, turning it on and playing some music from a game I liked. Only then could I go back to sleep. In the morning, I didn't say anything about it and eventually just moved on. It's possible that the Reaper wasn't there to visit me, but instead my cousin. Later on in the coming months, her mother passed away due to cancer. Part of me feels bad for making that conclusion though. I'm 36 male and live with my partner, who's 32 male, in London. It's just us and our dog in our terraced house. We went to bed as normal last night, around 10:30, and asleep by midnight. When I woke up this morning and went downstairs to make a coffee and let the dog out into the garden, I was stopped dead in my tracks. All four bulbs from our ceiling lights had been removed and lined up on the kitchen table. For context, they're four screw-in spotlights that go recessed ceiling spots. Our house was built in the 1840s and has high ceilings, so even standing on a kitchen chair, you can't reach them. It's a ladder job. My first thought it was a prank by my partner, but he denied it. My second thought, bizarre as it would be, was some sort of sleepwalking. I checked our ring alarm system. We've got motion sensors in the upper hallway and the lower hallway. You'd have to walk past them to get to the kitchen, and past them both to get the ladder from downstairs. But none of the sensors recorded anything between us going to bed and getting up. That also eliminates any suggestion of an intruder, as none of our doors or windows were tripped either. So where does that leave me? I'm an atheist medic who's never been one for tales of the paranormal, but I'm finding it hard reconciling finding four high and difficult to remove spotlights on the kitchen table when neither of us left the bedroom. Thoughts? Suggestions? Help? I'm so confused. Nothing like this has ever happened before. So I've been having some really horrible stuff going in my house. It started with hearing heavy boots on the flooring downstairs while home alone, and hearing plastic hit the floor and finding a plastic poker chip on the floor, which I'm certain wasn't there before. And then another time, hearing someone sprint up my stairs and into the second room while also home alone. I called my parents to see if they had come home early from the pub, but they said they hadn't. And then everyone who comes into my bedroom has this horrible feeling when they see my wardrobe. And I mean, people just don't like it at all. To the point my friends and I will sit in the living room because they feel like someone is standing in there. And this has been from separate people who don't even know one another. So I decided to use a spirit box to try to contact what it is. And I got some weird answers. So I first said, I'm reaching out to whoever is residing in my wardrobe. And my friend made a joke about Harry Potter, and it immediately said disrespectful, which freaked us out a bit. So then we asked, where did you come from? As no one has died in the house and it's a new build, and it said left side. Unsure if that has any correlation with anyone. Then after a few back and forths, we heard a series of knocks lead around my room, and then my poster fell off the wall, so me and my friend felt this horrible headache and felt lethargic. So we said goodbye, and it kept saying hello and wouldn't let us say goodbye. What does this mean? On the night before my first day of 7th grade, I was drifting off to sleep, but was partially woken by an odd feeling. It's like my brain wanted me to pay attention to something, but I couldn't figure out what, until I noticed a sort of clicking sound. It took me a few moments to figure out what it sounded like. The claws of a large animal clicking against the hardwood floor of the dining room as it walked. It sounded like a huge dog walking slowly, and it was getting closer. It stopped right outside my open door. My instincts told me I shouldn't turn to look around. I shouldn't move at all. I held my breath. I heard it breathing heavily, that wet breathing sound you hear from big dogs. I heard it lick its lips and shift positions occasionally. I don't know how long I lay there, waiting for it to move away, but eventually I drifted off to sleep, still hearing its breathing. Weird dream, right? I thought so, until today. In a conversation about hauntings and strange occurrences, my stepbrother mentioned that the time there was a dog man in the house on the night before the first day back at the school one year. the year I entered 7th grade and he entered 8th grade. Apparently that night, he heard something too, and unlike me, he saw something. He remembers hearing the clicking sound too, and thinking a stray dog had somehow gotten inside, despite the house being locked. He heard it walk through the dining room and down the hallway, then stop outside my door. Then, eventually, he heard it move on towards his room. When it got to his door, he was watching. Though it was dark, he faintly saw the silhouette of a person appear in his doorway. Sure that the dark was simply playing tricks on him, he stared for a while. Thinking his eyes would eventually adjust and see more clearly, he was sure whatever was there was staring back at him. Eventually, he quietly said, "Hey," to the figure in the doorway, and it silently disappeared. He ran to the door and looked down the hallway, finding nothing there. He used his phone as a torch and searched the entire house, aside from our parents' room, as the door was closed. He peeked into my room and saw me sleeping, so he assumed I'd slept through the entire thing. He checked that the front and back door were both locked and that no windows were open. Finding nothing out of place and no strange person or dog anywhere in the house, he went back to bed. Neither of us had ever spoken about it until today. I thought I'd been dreaming. He'd convinced himself he just heard odd noises from outside and thought they were inside, and the figure in his doorway was just his eyes playing tricks on him in the dark. It wasn't until we compared our experiences and found we'd heard the exact same thing on the same night that we realised it may not have been a dream or a noise from outside, or a trick of the light. Hi there. So I'd like some advice on some strange things that have occurred. Just a heads up, this is going to be long. Before I say what happened, we live in an apartment complex. The first apartment in which a lot of these occurrences happened, we had moved out of and no longer lived there. We moved due to ongoing issues we had with the people who lived next to us. We were offered to have us move into a different apartment, so we did. Just to be clear, the apartment in which we moved into is still within the same complex. So it all started not that long ago, around 2019. I was home alone at the time, working on some homework that I needed to catch up on. Meanwhile, my family was out at the store. I remember that I had left my blue hoodie on the couch, and then I just went inside my room to do my work. Some time passes, and I walk back out, and my hoodie's gone. I look everywhere, but I can't find it. After searching for what seemed like forever, I decided to check inside this mini closet that we had near our kitchen. Once opening it, I look to see that my hoodie is just tossed on the floor within the closet. I know for sure that I wasn't the one who put it there. While I thought it was odd, I just assumed that perhaps I did it and just didn't realise. Some months pass, and it happens again, but this time with my phone. I was in my room chilling, just using my phone, when all of a sudden I had to use the bathroom. I got up, and it wasn't even 5 minutes when I got out, only to see that my phone wasn't on my bed where I'd left it. I walked out and found it placed on the living room table. My mom, who at the time was the only one at home besides me, was sitting on one of the couches fixing her recipe book. I asked her if she was the one who had moved my phone. She said she didn't, and that she hadn't even been in my room. She also seemed serious when she said it wasn't her. My mom isn't the type of person to pull pranks or joke around like that. It would make more sense if it were my dad who were to do it, since he's the one who's known to pull pranks, jump scare us and just joke around in general. But he wasn't home. It couldn't have been my older brother either, because he was out with friends. Once again, I assumed that perhaps I was the one who did it, even though I didn't. Months pass, and it happens a third time, this time with my pyjamas. It was the night, and it was super hot, so I decided to borrow the fan that was in my parents' room. I had taken out my pyjamas and placed them on my bed while I went to grab the fan. As soon as I came back, my pajamas were gone. I looked for them but couldn't find them. At some point, I went back into my parents' room, and right there on the floor were my pajamas just thrown. I honestly tried to forget about it and move on. Time passes, and it happens a fourth time. At this point, I was going insane. It was also around this time that I was having these weird dreams. Now, I'm not sure to take the dreams seriously or not, but I thought I would add them in. In the first dream, I see myself sleeping in my bed, and sitting right next to me is a shadow figure. This figure had no features, and it seemed to have just been watching me as I slept. I didn't feel scared, let alone threatened. I was more confused and weirded out. The second dream happens the night after. In this dream, I felt something cold come up towards me and kiss me. I was confused when I woke up, but didn't think much of it since it was just a dream. After this, we ended up moving to the other apartment. So far, nothing happened when we first got there. It wasn't until my mom said she saw something. My mom is someone who has experienced the paranormal in the past. This occurred about 2 months ago. She and I were watching TV up in her room because my dad at the time was using the main one that was downstairs. She told me that as she was watching the TV, she saw this figure out in the hall walk past and into the direction towards my room. I tried to assure her that it was just her eyes playing tricks on her, since we were just staring at a screen. She was super hesitant though, and that she was sure that it was real. The same night, as I was sleeping, I woke up sometime in the middle of the night. This was strange to me since I'm a deep sleeper, and waking up in the middle of the night is rare for me. On top of my bed, I always place my retainer box and phone before I go to bed. As I was awake, I clearly heard someone touching and moving my retainer box around. It only lasted for a few seconds and then it stopped. Now this easily could have just been a hallucination. So I don't think much of it and just went back to sleep. The next night, something happened again. I was sleeping and once again I woke up at some odd hour in the night. I was trying to position myself to be more comfortable when all of a sudden I felt a hand touch the back of my neck. It was quick, but it made me jump so fast under the covers. After some time, I took a peek and didn't see anything. I just assumed that perhaps it was another hallucination I had. I even laughed for how I reacted. Months pass and nothing strange happens. That is, until something disappears. Inside my drawer, I always put my headphones when I'm done using them. One night, I had put them away inside my drawer. The next day, I wanted to use them, only to find out that they were gone. I tore my entire closet apart, including each and every drawer. They were nowhere to be seen. No one in my family took them either. I was upset that I would have had to go out and buy a brand new pair, because apparently the ones I had disappeared. So that's what I did. I bought the new pair, and I'm not kidding when I say that a few days later, the ones that I had lost reappeared inside my drawer. The same drawer that I had torn apart along with my entire closet. I was shocked and couldn't believe what I was seeing. There was no way I would have missed them. So far, that was the last strange thing that's happened as of now. Besides my things being moved around, I've never seen anything. It was more so than not minor occurrences. Nothing sinister ever happened. There are times where I have felt cold spots near me, though that could have just been changes in temperature. Just to be clear, the apartment complex in which we live is new. I don't see how it could be haunted. It's not old. Now, I'm not sure if this is any correlation, but when I was younger, about 13 or 14 years old, I tried to play with a Ouija board by myself. Yes, I know it was stupid of me to have done that. Trust me, I now know better, not to mess with that stuff. Now I'm 19, so it's been a while. I had made one myself with a piece of paper. When I tried using it, nothing happened. After a while, I figured it wasn't worth it and got rid of it. Ever since then, these strange things began to occur that I've mentioned above. There were countless times where I felt like I was being watched, though that could have just been me being paranoid. I also wanted to point out that even after we would move, these things would continue to happen. Like I said earlier, the headphone incident was the last thing that happened. That was 2 to 3 months ago. Things have become a bit more calm. Is this a good sign that perhaps whatever it was has decided to stop and move on? I'd appreciate some insight on what it could be that has caused these things to happen in the first place. For context, my parents are divorced, and my dad lives in Mexico, while my sister and I live in the USA with my mom. Every spring break, we go and spend it with my dad. He still lives in the house we used to live in when they were together, and I must add that I had never been a fan of the house. One of the reasons is that a relative was killed in the living room by an intruder. This is a 2-floor house, and the stairs are directly in front of my room. That night, my dad had to leave for the gym. I wasn't scared or anything, considering that I had to spend the night alone a couple times before. It was around 8:30 at night, and my sister was already falling asleep. Suddenly, my dog started to growl. I wanted to believe that it was because people could be heard walking on the streets, but then my dog started to be scared, and so was I. Again, the stairs were in front of my room, so I kept trying to see if anyone could be seen, but there was no one. At this point, my sister was wide awake and shaking. My dog then got smaller. It was like something was holding her by the neck. I couldn't do anything. I was as scared as her and my sister. She was like that for some seconds until I got closer to her. She then ran to me, shaking. As soon as my dog calmed down, I called my dad. About 7 years ago, I was at my boat. It was an old wooden cabin cruiser that I kept at an old broken down marina on the Chesapeake Bay. I slept on the boat in the main salon on a pull-out couch. I was lying on my back, and in the middle of the night, I awoke to find myself with a giant male black Labrador retriever straddling me with his legs either side of me on the bed. He was just standing there looking around like I wasn't there at all. I immediately thought I was dreaming. I said I was going to shut my eyes and open them again, and it would be gone. I shut them and reopened them, and it was still there. It wasn't mean or aggressive, just huge. I shut them again and reopened them, and it was gone. Later that morning, a worker at the marina fell to his death off the top of a travel lift, a big crane that hauls boats in and out of the water. I had never heard anything about black dog apparitions in my life and thought it was just a dream. But when I googled it, apparently they're often seen near water and can be an indicator of death. I was pretty blown away after that. So the boat I'm sleeping on is also haunted. I know it's haunted because the ghost would always play tricks on me, turning on switches to things I knew I had turned off. The ghost's favourite thing was to turn on my freshwater pump after I left. It was a pull-out switch on the console, and it wasn't easy to pull out either. It got so bad that one weekend I had my friend watch me turn it off. I get back the following Friday, and it was back on off course. I believe the ghost is the original owner, a friend of mine. The boat was his pride and joy. I finally decided to tell you about my first and only encounter with the paranormal, which still brings tears to my eyes when I think about it. I've never told anyone about this, so this is kind of the premiere. I've been going for night walks for at least 15 years. I love the silence and atmosphere of the night, and I prefer to be alone, listening to audiobooks while I'm walking. I'm with my almost 7 feet quite a big person, or at least I'd claim not to be the average victim of a lurking robber. But obviously some entities seem to not be impressed by non-issues like physical size. My nightly route led me through an unlit rural road. a short passage through the woods, a well-lit settlement, and even an old graveyard to shorten my way home. The funny thing is, and this is the only funny thing about the story, my encounter was in the settlement. I never experienced anything like that in the rather creepy locations. It was a clear night around 11 pm, as I walked my way down the street with my headphones on, listening to some horror novels, as I suddenly heard someone behind me whispering my name very aggressively. Then immediately I turned around to look for the source of that whispering, just to see a human-like shadow figure, so dark as if something was just cut out of this world and running towards me, no more than 3 feet away from me, with something in these light-eating hands, as if it was going to hit with that thing in the next moment. I was so shocked that I held my forearms in front of my head and closed my eyes to protect my head from the anticipated hit, and screamed all the breath out I had at the moment. But nothing hit me. I opened my eyes again and realised that nothing was there. I stood there. My heart was still pumping like crazy, and we were completely alone. After some seconds I moved on, telling myself that it was just my imagination, inspired by a horror novel, as one of the surrounding house doors opened, and an old man ran out of his house, with an old-fashioned poking stick in his hands, asking where the attacker had gone. He told me that he and his wife saw that person running towards me, and that he came to help me fight off the guy. After I asked him if he reminded any facial features or anything remarkable, he and his wife said no. To this day, 10 years later, I still think about this occurrence and it still gives me the shivers. Normally, I'm very grateful to get help in emergency situations, but on that night, I would have loved to not get any help at all, so I could just blame my imagination. Before I tell my story, I'd like you to know that English is not my first language, so I'm sorry for any grammatical mistakes. This happened back at the beginning of 2019. Me and my family had been living in a very old wooden house for about 3 years before this happened. It was a really big and old house that had floor made out of wood and really big windows with no curtains that gave us a view of the backyard that had no lighting system, so it was completely dark during night. Before my family, the house stayed empty for about 5 years, and the only people to ever live there before us and besides the original owner were a couple that only stayed there for some months. I had never been alone at night in that house, considering that my parents, or at least my sister, were always home with me during the night time. When we first moved there, I spent a year having the worst nightmares of my life, and it was really traumatizing. One day, when my parents were travelling to visit my brother, who lives 8 hours away, and would only come back the next day, my sister decided to go on a date with her boyfriend around 7 pm, leaving me alone in the house. Even though I had always been kind of creeped out by that big old house, that for some reason still had incandescent lamps making it creepier at night, on that specific day, I wasn't really worried when she left me alone. Obviously, before she left, I checked to see if all the doors and windows were locked, and they were, so I wasn't really worried. And I lived in a very safe and good neighbourhood, so I wasn't really paranoid about burglars or anything. When it was around 8 pm and I was watching some TV show in my sister's room, located at the end of the hallway on the first floor, I heard footsteps coming from the living room, and at first, I just thought it was my dad because this person seemed to be wearing boots. But then I remembered that I was completely by myself and that the house was all locked. I hadn't heard any doors or windows open, and after pausing the TV and knocking the TV on the living room was off, I kept hearing something walk around the living room with really loud and heavy footsteps. The steps seemed kind of random. The person seemed to just be walking in circles or something, but the steps became louder and closer, and I realised they had entered the hallway and were about walking to my sister's bedroom. The door was on the far right of the room, and the bed was in the far left on the opposing wall, so I couldn't see the hallway or anything besides the door. The footsteps were getting closer to the room and then suddenly stopped really close to the door, but not close enough for me to see it. After silence for a few seconds, the footsteps turned around and walked back to the living room, stopping somewhat in the middle of it. I waited some minutes and, not hearing those sounds anymore, I, in a dumb move, decided to check around the house to see if I'd find someone. I checked everywhere on the first floor, checked all the windows and doors and found nothing. The only place I didn't go to alone was the second floor, which the only way to get there was by walking in a really old metal spiral staircase. I called my sister, and when she got there, we went to the second floor together and to the outside of the house and found nothing. The thing that sticked with me the most is that if this was a person, it would have been impossible for them to go up those metal stairs without making any noise, considering how loud their footsteps were. After this day, I never stayed alone at night there, and we moved shortly after, not related to this. Nobody in my family believed me at the time and just called me crazy. I always had nightmares when living in that house, before and after what happened. Especially when I slept in my sister's bedroom. There are some other details that I didn't find necessary to put in here, but what I told is basically the most important part. I just wanted to tell someone about this, because nobody ever believed me. So lots of paranormal experiences happen at my house. My family used to get it blessed and have the energy cleansed, but it never worked. But now I'm starting to think maybe that's because it's not the house itself that haunted, but the whole neighbourhood. My neighbourhood is a little weird. It goes around a lake and there's quite a distance between some houses. And my sisters and I used to love to take drives around the lake because it was beautiful. But we don't anymore, because of what happened last time. It was pretty late and dark outside, and we were only halfway around the lake when my sister, who was driving, Danny, suddenly stopped the car and the energy around us changed. I thought I was the only one who felt it, so I ignored it and asked Danny why she'd stopped the car. She kept her eye on the road ahead of us and said, "Do you guys see that lady too?" We all looked around, but I personally didn't see anything at the time. But one of my other, Em, asked, "Is she blonde and wearing..." and described what the lady looked like. Danny nodded and Em said, "Yeah, I've seen her around the neighbourhood before. You shouldn't have stopped, because now she's going to follow us." Danny immediately started driving again, but a few minutes later, she started speeding up and said, "I just saw her again." She kept seeing her over and over, and eventually she just turned off the road and headed towards a different lake. She never saw the lady while we went to this new lake. It's like, as soon as we left the neighbourhood, she left us alone. The next day, I went to the post office with my at-the-time boyfriend, and while we were waiting in line, I noticed a missing poster hanging on the wall. I took a closer look and saw a lady, the same lady that was described perfectly by Em. She went missing in my neighbourhood and apparently has been missing for 11 years. This experience was in my house this time. I actually shared this one in a comment section before, but I'm going to share it again. My best friend was over for a sleepover. She's the same one from the experience with the lady around the lake. We had just settled down for bed and were laying on little mats on the floor, and after a few minutes of silence, I heard my friend start to mutter a prayer under her breath. My friend is not religious, so I immediately knew something was off. I heard her whisper, "In the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to leave me alone." And as soon as she said that, I heard what sounded like hands and feet slapping against the floor and heading in my direction, like someone was crawling towards me. I froze in fear and felt it crawl onto the mattress I was on. I could feel the indents as it made its way up towards me. I was too scared to turn to see what it was, but soon I could feel something leaning down into the side of my face, like it was staring at me. The energy of this thing felt awful. It was one of the worst feelings I've ever felt. After about a minute, I worked up the courage to turn around to face it. But as soon as I did, the presence and the indents disappeared along with the awful energy I was feeling. The next day, I mentioned it to my friend and she said, "I'm sorry. I was trying to get it to leave me alone, not send it to you." Whatever it was came back a second time when my friend wasn't there and did the same thing. A little while after, my family had someone who was very in tune with the spirit world stay with us for about a week, and she told us that there were lots of spirits in the house, but there's one in particular that's stronger than the others. I'm guessing that this is that one. I haven't had this happen a third time, and I really hope it doesn't. So my family owns some property down at the lake for camping that's completely gated. The gate is old and very loud, so no person or animal could open it or climb it without being heard. There's also little rocks all around the tents, so no one can walk around the property without being heard, as there's always a loud crunch to their steps. My friend, same one from the other stories. I'm surprised she still came over a lot after everything. She doesn't anymore, now we always hang at her house. And my little sister decided that they wanted to go camping down at the lake. I don't know why the hell we decided to do that after everything, but we did. The lake also has no Wi-Fi or phone service, so we downloaded a couple movies on my friend's phone to watch. We drove down to the lake and parked on the other side of the gate because vehicles can't really fit well on the actual property. While we were closing the gate behind us, we noticed someone walking across the street from us. It's not unusual for people to take walks around the lake. We actually see it a lot round here. But this person had a strange vibe, and I think my friend and sister noticed it too, because they quickly shut the gate and asked if I had brought my protection crystals. I have a few and usually keep them under my pillow, but this time I laid them around the inside of the tent. Around midnight, we were still watching movies when there was a very loud sound right next to my head from outside the tent. It was a sound I had never really heard before, and the best way I can describe it was a growl. My friend quickly paused the movie, and everything went quiet and still. We had some lanterns on in the tent, but everyone was too scared to move to grab them. We waited a moment, and we heard the growl again. I slowly started to sit up as my friend and sister started to look at me. I could tell they wanted to start yelling and calling for help to our neighbours, who happened to be camping right next door. I shook my head at them and whispered them to be quiet and still, because I had no idea what was outside the tent. We get cougars around here, but only very rarely, but this didn't sound anything like a cougar. We heard whatever was outside start to circle around the tent, and my friend whispered to me to call for help. I told her no again, and that we needed to be quiet. So she grabbed my sister's hand, and they started quietly praying. Again, my friend is not religious, but she always ended up praying while she was with us. My sister took her phone out and slowly started to crawl around the tent in hopes of finding a spot that gave her some service. As she was doing this, whatever was outside started to press against the tent, as if to see how much strength it would take to get into it. My sister managed to get the tiniest bit of service on her phone and started texting our parents, friends and sister to get someone to come visit us, but no one replied. Eventually, one of her friends ended up responding and called our parents, but they didn't pick up, so they called our older sister and she thankfully did pick up. My sister's friend texted us shortly after and told us that our sister was on her way to come get us. We heard whatever was outside find the entrance to the tent. Our tent actually had 2 zippers to get inside. One was into a netted screen, and the other was to get into the actual tent. It started fumbling around with the zipper as my older sister's car pulled up. The headlights shone through the tent, but there was no shadow on the other side. It was like whatever was there had disappeared. We heard my older sister open the gate, and we immediately exited the tent and ran to her in the car, and she drove away as quickly as she could. When we got home, we all started discussing what happened, and apparently, no one had heard anything open or climb the gate, nor had anyone heard anything walking towards the tent before the growling noise, and no one saw or heard it leave when my sister pulled up. We also talked about the person we had seen before we closed the gate, and it turns out we all saw something different. My friend had seen a short man with short hair. I had seen a tall woman with long hair. My sister said she couldn't make out what she had seen. This could have just been our minds remembering it wrong because of what had happened after that, but I personally don't think it was. The next day we went back to the lake to collect everything we had left behind in our hurry to get away. Our phones, crystals, etc. We decided to check around the tent for any footprints that might have been left. There were bare human footprints going all the way around the tent, but there were none heading towards or leading away from the tent. It was as if whatever it was had just appeared and disappeared. We also had left a ton of snacks out on the table that was a good distance away from the tent. Any animal that managed to get inside the property would have gone for the food and tried to avoid the humans, but this thing went straight for the tent with people in it. The food was perfectly untouched the next day. My sister and I don't camp anymore, and anytime my parents have friends with kids over to camp, my sister and I take the kids to the house to sleep because we're always worried whatever was outside our tent will come back. The house I grew up in, my family and I believe, was haunted. We had a lot of odd things happen, and many of our guests would see or hear things without any mention from us about the creepy occurrences. It wasn't uncommon, and for the most part didn't feel malicious. One night though, I felt terrified from my experience. I was about 16 or 17, and I was laying in bed trying to sleep. I was having trouble sleeping, and I usually sleep in the pitch black. The house itself wasn't old, but was very creaky, and it could be loud when it settled at night. So I heard creaking and at first didn't think anything of it. It sounded like there was someone standing outside my room, so I got up and checked, but no one was there. I brushed it off as the house settling and went back to bed. Then I heard a creak in the corner of my room. The way my room was set up was the head of my bed was against the wall and my bed stuck out, so there was free space all around my bed. I again didn't think anything about the creak. A couple minutes later though, I hear another, and then a couple of minutes after that, another. The thing was though, the creak sounded like they were slowly travelling around my bed. I got up, turned my lights on, and sat on my bed for like 10 minutes. Not one sound. I get up, switch my lights off, the creak start again. It sounded like there was someone slowly walking from one side of my bed, and then back around to the other. I heard no footsteps, but the floor of my room creaked a bit, where you were standing on the floor, and that's what I was hearing. I got up and switched on the light twice more. Both times the creaks would stop. It also sounded like the creaks were getting faster. After probably an hour of this, I almost fell asleep with my light on and decided, fuck it, I'm turning off the light. This is just in my head, and it's not I'm too tired to deal with this shit. It was like 2 a.m. I turn off my light, the creaks continue, but I ignore them. I'm almost asleep when I swear it sounded like a child's voice say hello in my ear, very softly. I was like half asleep when this happened, but my heart started to beat fast. I told myself it was a dream, and it just felt really realistic because I wasn't fully asleep yet. It sounded so real. A couple minutes passed, and I didn't hear the creaks or anything, and was just starting to convince myself that it was a dream, when in the other ear, louder than the first, I hear a really deep voice whisper, "Are you scared yet?" I jumped up from my bed in one leap towards my light switch and turned it on. I was freaked the fuck out. I slept with my bright lights on all night. Maybe I hallucinated because I was scared. I don't know, But I never had anything happen like that before or since, and that was 10 years ago. Still creeps me out when I think about it. So I've recently heard a story about a black thing that resembled a jet black goat, and I think I need to talk about it. First of all, I don't know if it's a ghost or something worse, but it's definitely something. Years ago, I heard a story about a distant family member that really creeped me out. It's about two college girls, G and T. They went to a party late at night at a friend's house. It got really late, like 3 a.m., and they decided to walk home. Only problem is that there's a graveyard on their way, one that really gives some bad vibes. They were walking, and T noticed something inside the graveyard moving and thought it was a kid, as it was rather small. G didn't like the idea, but they got closer to take a better look. And just right at the moment, G turned his back by instinct, and that little thing got huge, at least 2 meters tall. They stood still back to back, paralyzed by fear. And then T started screaming, "It's your fault! It's your fault, stupid bitch!" So G got really worried but still spooked, and turning her back to the graveyard, she grabbed T's hand and walked back to their friend's house. At their friend's house, T got worse and began banging her head to the ground and yelling horribly, not closing her eyes and staring at people. G called her mother and T's mother. They got there with a priest and started praying for 3 hours until T finally started sleeping. T got up at 6 and didn't remember anything, just something black. Really black. And just by remembering, she felt sick. So here's when I got curiosity about what the hell did she see, and started investigating, and found out a similar story in X about 3 guys in Maine. Basically, they went for a road trip to every old town around where they live, and outside one of them, they saw an old house. OP heard a voice saying, "Don't look at the windows." And a friend of his looked at the house and got really hysterical. He began crying and saying, it's not my fault. I think it's your fault. I don't know." Then started banging his head against the driver's seat. OP got spooked by his friend's reaction and just drove him home. But he noticed his friend stared at him in his knife, not closing his eyes too much. They dropped him off at his house, and the next day, he didn't remember anything. I always loved hearing about ghost stories, but I didn't fully believe in them. One of my friends decided to take me to their grand's house that was supposedly haunted. I was at first skeptical about this, thinking they were going to try and scare me or something. We decided to spend time in each part of the house alone, trying to see if we could hear or see anything. I remember being in the bathroom with the door closed and the lights off, only having one candle. I sat there for around 30 minutes until I heard a knock on the door. First, I thought it was one of my friends trying to scare me, so I opened the door and saw no one there. My first thought was them playing a prank on me, so I closed the door and sat down on the floor. After a few minutes, I heard the knock again and I opened the door. But as soon as I opened the door, the tap behind me in the bath opened. I remember being scared, trying to call my friends. They didn't believe me at first, knowing I was always the one joking around with things like this. But then we heard running in the hallway towards the bathroom. We shut the door, turned off the tap, and stayed in that bathroom for about an hour. Yes, we were the typical white people who hid in a place where it started. But we didn't have anywhere else to go since the running came from the only exit. Now, I'm not saying this is 100% a ghost, but I've spent months trying to think of an explanation for what I've witnessed, and I still can't think of a logical one. I might still be a bit skeptical about it, but for me, that was one hell of an experience, so I couldn't explain. So I've been holding on to this experience for about a year now, and have decided to share it with you guys, mostly to get it off my chest. I work in a deep underground potash mine. For anyone who has never experienced what it's like to be several thousand feet underground, It's a very uncanny experience. There's no natural lighting, and usually the only artificial light comes from your cat lamp or any vehicles you're operating. You can hear the earth shift and the vast weight above you slowly bear down on the tunnel you're working in. I had been working underground for about 6 months and was being sent to an abandoned part of the mine to make it safe enough for crews to be sent in, to recover some equipment and machinery that had been left behind. The area I was being sent in was infamous for being the location a mine operator, that I will refer to as Chris, had been killed by being pinched in between two pieces of equipment and having his torso split in half. The accident had shaken a lot of the guys underground, and many refused to work in that area again. So, as the junior operator, I was the unlucky bastard that had to go in. I was sent in by myself to get the job started, and was supposed to get another operator to come help me once I was ready. The beginning tunnel had so much potash dust piled up over the years that it reached my knees and made it almost impossible to see while driving in my bolter, a vehicle that drives 8-foot metal bolts into the ceiling to prevent the ceiling from caving in. I remember feeling so uneasy while I was in there, like I wasn't supposed to be there. Once I got to my first location to start bolting, I began setting everything up. I was setting up bolts when I noticed a moving light coming from the opposite end of the tunnel from where I had entered. I initially thought it could be another worker that was also doing work in the tunnel, so I started doing cat lamp signals, our own form of sign language with our light so we can communicate. I signaled for whoever was making the light to come towards me. Once I made that signal, the light stopped moving and after a few seconds, disappeared. I was becoming worried and tried to reason to myself what the light could be. It really couldn't have been another worker, because it wasn't safe to go to any farther until my work was done. It couldn't have been a piece of equipment, because it responded to my light. I was terrified and honestly didn't know what to do. I was scared to attempt to leave because my bolter kicked up so much dust. But I also didn't want to go by foot because I'd only have my cat lamp for lighting. I decided to stay camped inside the bolter till my backup arrived. The light never returned, and when my co-worker arrived, I gained enough confidence to finish the job and leave. I don't know what I saw, but I can't help but think it's the soul of Chris. The idea of his soul being trapped in that tunnel really bothers me, and I actually left the underground for a surface position, partially because of this encounter.